somehow the topic that I'm discussing, which is Israel, is slightly more pleasant than what you were discussing. But the Middle East is changing in response to the way that the United States is refusing in any way to police the Israelis and get them to calm down. Yesterday, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan signed a mutual defense agreement, which states that attack on one country is considered an attack on the other one, by implication extending Pakistan's nuclear umbrella to Saudi Arabia. And this was a direct result of the Israelis deciding that they were going to bomb Hamas leaders in Qatar. They basically decided that what they need to do is to bomb the negotiating team of Hamas in Qatar, which is the country holding the mediation to end the war. And that was Israel's idea of trying to improve the prospects of a peaceful solution. Qatar is a major non-NATO ally, meaning that of the United States, meaning that it is designated as a sort of American protectorate. And the fact that the Americans would allow Israeli jets to go probably over Saudi airspace and then bomb a major non-NATO ally kind of wipes the floor with the credibility of American security guarantees.
And haven't America got a giant base in Qatar?
They do, with very sophisticated air defense systems, which did absolutely nothing. Meaning that the Americans were at least a passive participant in the strike. And the idea that they didn't know about it is ridiculous, because the commander of American forces in the Middle East was in Israel 3 days before, and American commanders sit at every level next to Israeli counterparts coordinating the regional war. So this caused the Saudis to panic because they figured we could be next. And they decided to go and get a nuclear guarantee from the Pakistanis. I wrote a little bit on my personal blog about the strike on Qatar and what it means. But one of the things that it means is that when the Americans say that they want to negotiate, it could be a ruse to start bombing you, because this is the second time that it happens.
In the same year.
This
is what happened with Iran. They were given the 60-day deadline, and then as soon as the deadline was up and there was a number of roadblocks put in place to actually coming up with an agreement, boom.
No, worse than that. Negotiations between the Americans and the Iranians were scheduled for 2 days later. And then the Israelis attacked them. And the perception is that, look, we can't trust the Americans. And so the Muslim states are banding together. And Saudi Arabia aligning with Pakistan is a big deal, because Pakistan is a major defense ally of Turkey. They work together on developing military technology, training, tactics, etc., etc. And the Turks clearly see that relationship as a future pathway for them to get nuclear weapons. And now with the Pakistani nuclear umbrella extended to Saudi Arabia, and with the Turks and the Israelis fighting in Syria by proxy for now, but the Israelis last week took out some Turkish surveillance equipment by attacking Syrian territory directly, what the Israelis are willing into being is their nightmare, which is these big Muslim countries allying together rather than doing what they would normally do, which is fight each other. So this is a bit of a disaster.
It is worrying, Pakistan extending its nuclear umbrella to Saudi Arabia, because alliances like that, we've done that before. I think, of course,
Yes.
of 1914, where, one small thing can very quickly snowball into
Exactly.
something gigantic.
So what's happening now is that not just that, the other huge defense partner of Pakistan is obviously China. And it was Chinese equipment that was responsible for shooting down the Indian jets, the Indian Rafales and the Indian MiGs that were shot down in May. So what you're ending up with is a situation where the Muslim world as a whole, because of American support for Israel, is not just banding together, which they're clearly doing, they're also siding with the Chinese, which is what Samuel Huntington warned against in 1992 or 1994, I believe, blaming excessive liberalism for this. Now what's actually the proximate cause is excessive Zionism. The recklessness of Israel and the fact that it's threatening everybody around them is driving this. And in case you think it's, I'm being unfair, no, the Israelis are saying that everybody in Gaza, in Gaza City, which is in the very north of the Gaza Strip, needs to head south to the Egyptian border. And they are imposing, that is going to lead at some point to them trying to drive the Palestinians over the border into Egypt. And Egypt's trying to stop that by mobilizing troops into the Sinai to try to say to the Israelis, look, you've got to calm down now. You can't just sort of attack us and force these people across the border. But the Israelis are actually doing the same thing in the West Bank. They're doing everything they can to make sure that there's no two-state solution. And they are locking down the West Bank city by city so that each city is its own contained unit and cannot communicate with each other. Meaning that if a war breaks out where they try to sort of get rid of the Palestinians in the West Bank in the same way that they're doing in Gaza, they can do this one city at a time. The implication being that they're threatening Egypt and Jordan, which are seen by the Saudis as key allies and necessary for the stability of the region. Which is why after the bombing of Qatar, they announced this defense agreement with Pakistan. They didn't tell the Americans about it until after it was signed. Which I think is quite an important...
Can I play devil's advocate real quick
Please.
for a moment?
Please.
Not that I disagree with you that Zionism seems to be out of control at the moment.
Yep.
Absolutely agree with you there. But also just to say, I mean, Hamas are insane terrorists.
Yes.
Like, I don't shed a tear for those guys in Doha.
Absolutely.
And Egypt, like back in the 70s when Sadat made a peace deal with Israel, the Arabs murdered him.
Yes.
Right. So
the Muslim Brotherhood murdered him. The sort of...
Sorry.
Who are the parents of Hamas.
Well, part of my...
The parent organization of
So
Hamas.
it's both... both sides, it's...
So...
Well, part of my major concern, outside of just a full-on hot war, it escalating into a hot war in the region, which Western allies would be drawn into, would be that expelling all of these people into somewhere like Egypt. I can see, and some Israeli ministers have already put this forward as a solution. I could see these people moving through North Africa into Europe, as many of them, as many do, and from that point they go all across Europe. And what do you get there? Well, you get a lot of men, women, and children, all of whom have been radicalized by what has happened to them.
Yes.
All of whom blame European countries and the US for being allies to Israel,
Correct.
deciding to join cells within those countries that will then go on to commit terror attacks later.
Absolutely.
That's one of my greatest fears.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. So there are several dimensions of this. First of all, the West has an interest in the Muslim world not establishing a network of alliances comparable to NATO. That's one strategic objective. The second strategic objective is to make sure that they don't all side with China, because the natural resources there feed the Chinese industrial machine and make it even stronger. The third is this shouldn't become the West's domestic problem, but you see Israeli politicians saying, well, these people, the Palestinians should be sent to Ireland, or the Palestinians should be sent to Spain, or the Palestinians should be dispersed all over Western Europe or Australia or what have you. So this has always been an Israeli talking point, and now it's being reinforced a lot from senior people in government, in the Israeli government, saying, yeah, that's exactly what should happen. It's the West that should take the Palestinians and solve the problem for the Israelis. So on every level, this is terrible for the West. And this is a direct cost of the Americans refusing to basically put a lid on Israel's actions. And you see Trump here, according to the Wall Street Journal, saying about Netanyahu that he is effing me after the strike on Doha. And we can see that the strike on Qatar really effed the United States, because it pushed the Saudis into Pakistan's arms, into Turkey's arms, and into China's arms. And the Americans are not willing to do anything about it. And you can have a conspiratorial explanation as to why that is. Another explanation, which was explained to me, I think by Carl, which was explained to me by Carl, and he made a brilliant point. The Americans view the Israelis through a purely emotional lens. And because they view them through a purely emotional lens as a sort of favorite son, they give them a huge amount of latitude. But then at some point, there's going to be the realization that that child is a monster. And when that happens, I would argue, the emotional reaction is going to be equally severe. And is going to go, we want nothing to do with this, help us get rid of this thing. And if you look at what was happening with Charlie Kirk, what's happened with Candace Owens, what's happened with Tucker Carlson, they've been increasingly turning against Israel. And this kind of strategic blunder that is civilization shifting, pushing the entirety of the Muslim world into China's arms and into greater unity, this is going to backfire enormously. And this will eventually turn the West against Israel, much more so than the pro-Palestine leftists, who I have nothing but contempt for as civilization destroyers. So there's got to be some moderation. But the Israelis seem incapable of doing it. They seem incapable of just slowing down a little bit.
Well, again, on your points of the entire Muslim bloc potentially unifying and allying with other groups, one other reason that we wouldn't want that is if they do unify in such a way and decide that we are their enemies, in the West, not just in Europe, but also increasingly in America as well, they already have massive Muslim communities in those countries who are going to be far, far more loyal to whatever orders are coming from the East than they are loyal to the countries of occupation that they live in right now.
So
that would be something that worries me. Beau, Beau, did you?
I was just going to make one point that springs to mind whilst you're talking, is that it seems to have been this way for decades. When you're talking about this, that like, can America reel in Israel in any real sense? I'm thinking of the late 60s, early 70s, the LBJ Nixon years, when Israel was just doing whatever it wanted, and then the United States goes, calm down, stop, until the point where all the Arab countries get together and boycott and do an oil embargo.
Yes.
And it totally screws America in all sorts of ways. And America's like saying, please, Israel, can you please stop being so crazy? And Israel's like, no, we're going to do whatever we want.
Pretty much.
And we're still in that situation.
So basically, they don't have a lot of experience over generations of being next to other empires that take a long time to wake up. So if you're Germany and you're next to Russia and you were wise as opposed to the current leadership, you'd realize that you don't want to cross the Russians too much because it would trigger a major war. And if it did trigger a major war, your best interest is probably going to be not to try to invade Moscow, but to keep it on the borders of the two empires and then negotiate a peace afterwards. Which is very much how these European empires fought each other, with some exceptions, Napoleon, Hitler, etc., but these are remembered because they're exceptional. The Israelis don't have that kind of historic memory. And because they're new to this game, they think that force is the solution to everything. And their thinking is exactly like that of the left. When we do it, it's all right, but when it's done to us, October 7 is like 5 bazillion September 11th. Well, okay, obviously it was terrible, and it shouldn't have happened, but it's over now, and the war has been going on for 2 years, and you've not gotten anywhere, except unifying much bigger neighbors against you, and driving them into a bloc that is completely hostile, not just to you, but to the Western states on whose survival you depend. The Western states which your survival depends on. So this is madness, and it needs to be stopped. And I'll, given the limitations of time, I'll leave it there.
I do remember I read a quote once. I forget if it was from like Clinton or maybe even Johnson, who was a big supporter of Israel. I think he was like their guy.
Right.
He was 2 thumbs up, and they were 2 thumbs up for him. One of them said, and it was quoted around the time when the Iran situation was happening earlier this year, that as president, there will come a point where your relations with Israel will just piss you off. There will be no other way to deal with it other than you will just be furiously raging impotently in the Oval Office, and there's not much that you can do about it.
Well, you could not give them billions of dollars of aid and military assistance every single year. I mean,
so from the Wall Street Journal,
nothing written in the Constitution that says you have to do that, is there?
Answering that point, from the Wall Street Journal about Trump being absolutely enraged with Netanyahu, another reason for the continued warm relations between Netanyahu and Trump is the Israeli leader's influence with Congress and in Republican-centric media. The domestic influence affects the foreign policy.
I mean, with Trump as well, personally for him, I would imagine also the fact that his daughter's married to Jared Kushner and he has part Jewish grandchildren.
Yes.
Is also a big emotional pull for him.
Yes, but that also means that if the emotions were to sort of shift, they wouldn't shift gradually. It would be, as a man of, deep emotion and strongly motivated by his feelings and emotions, it's not going to be calibrated when it happens.
Yeah, I suppose.
Well, see, you mentioned Candy Sones. I see Candy Sones talking about AIPAC and why does this always happen? Because, AIPAC's got loads and loads of congressmen and women in its pocket.
Yep.
Loads of them.
Yep.
But yeah, you can't really talk about that. Apparently, we probably won't put that bit on YouTube.
We'll see. Well, I mean, we're on YouTube right now, so.
It's live. Shit.
He's been too comfortable for too long.
I'm only quoting Candy Sowens.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll read through some of the Rumble rants and super chats that we've got here. It seems that this one has been, as you would expect with such a subject, somewhat contentious, so there'll be some questions fielded to you that you can reply to there, Firas. So first of all, on YouTube, this is responding to my segment saying one in, one out is human laundering, turning illegal immigrants into legal ones.
Exactly.
Yeah. Pretty much. On to your segment. So Swamp Cleaner says, if you think Hamas wants a peaceful
they absolutely don't.
I have a bridge to sell you. Yeah, but...
No, they absolutely don't.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I might have been given the complete wrong information. But around the time when Hamas was becoming the de facto leaders of Palestine, was there not Israeli involvement in making sure that they were in that position, or am I completely off base there?
There was some Israeli support for Hamas, and it continued all the way until just before 7 October, when Netanyahu was facilitating payments from the Qataris to go to Hamas, because he thought that this was one way to preserve the peace, and because he thought that having the West Bank under one administration, the PLO, and Gaza under another, Hamas, meant that he couldn't be pressured to accept a two-state solution.
Okay, so divide and conquer.
So this was like this is well established, and this isn't even a contentious point. This isn't, this is just facts.
And isn't there another angle that before Hamas was sort of the legitimately voted in rulers of the Gaza Strip, before that was the case, there was just a whole number of God knows what organisations, and Israel would rather have one body that they could sit down and negotiate with, even if it is Hamas.
No, that's there was the PLO leading a bunch of other smaller
but the
organizations,
PLO was
and
just
Hamas.
Exactly, but the PLO. So you've got Yasser Arafat sitting at the top of the PLO, and you can talk to him, but then he doesn't control what everyone under him does. Wasn't that the case for the last few years of Yasser Arafat?
So there were always dissident
agree
Palestinian organizations, but they weren't strong enough to challenge Fatah, which is Arafat's organization, if it decided that it absolutely wanted something. It had the ability to impose on most Palestinian groups with significance, except for a couple that were being funded by the Syrians or the Iraqis, and these guys were just lunatic radicals on their own. So the Abu Nidal organization being one example of them.
I feel like, Yasser Arafat would agree to something, and then the next day, some other dudes would just... But anyway,
yeah.
It's complicated.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who are the men that pick for scraps amongst the ruins at the end of history? You should know, because you encounter them every day. Between the towering buildings of a fallen empire, we find the Fellahin, the historyless men, who know nothing of the turning of the cosmic wheel and find themselves outside of civilization itself. Cut loose from the great chain of being, they represent the loam into which our dying culture will return. That is, unless we choose to take up the burden once again. This Fellahin condition is the subject we explore in issue 4 of Islander magazine, on sale while stocks last and available worldwide at shop.lotuseaters.com.